Welcome, everybody. We have an incredible guest joining us today, and I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. But first, I want to give you a word from our sponsors. The Pressing the Limits podcast is brought to you by ZionMissionaryChurch.net, where you can listen and watch messages, share your prayer requests, or even find out how to plan a visit. And also by NeuroPowerSource.com. Resources for your mind, your body, and your spirit. And you're going to find all the recommended gear that I use, including the Iron Neck. You'll want to be sure to check it out. Our guest today is Robert Sherman, and he is the CMO of Iron Neck, which manufactures and sells innovative strength training equipment for sports, fitness, as well as rehabilitation. Now, this was developed in response to the concussion epidemic that is seen in sports. Iron Neck provides a safe, effective, and efficient way to improve neck strength and mobility, to reduce neck and back pain, things that we're all going to talk about today. Iron Neck is used by thousands of pro, college, and high school athletes across the world to reduce concussion risk, including the NFL, the NHL, the UFC, Formula One, IndyCar, international rugby, as well as the military. So, Robert, welcome to the show today.
Glad to be on here. Looking forward to talking neck strength and anything else we get into.
I love it. Now, I love neck training. Feats over the years I've done, swinging a wrecking ball from my neck. Some of our listeners saw on ABC's To Tell the Truth when I was bending steel bars across my neck, suspending and hanging my wife from a neck harness. But Robert is going to talk with us today and show us how to take neck training to an entirely whole new level. So listeners, get ready as we get to dive into all things neck today. So let me ask you, why do you think that neck training is underrated and underutilized?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, there's a few things that are related to it. The first is just generally it's not on most people's radar. Mm-hmm. You're obviously going to see it in football teams, wrestling programs, anyone, boxing, anyone doing any types of feats of strength for certain. But for the general population, it's just not something that's on people's radar. The second factor would probably be that it's not really a sexy beach muscle. It's not something you're going to see, people in every gym, focusing on. The methods of neck training, I think, particularly for a general population, aren't necessarily inviting or appealing if you're looking at four-way machines or any type of harness. And, people are, if they've ever had a neck injury or anything happen to their neck or a stiff neck, people are very, don't touch it, don't want to do anything to it. This will kind of resolve itself. And, the last thing would be that, the research that's out there, really isn't widely known. It's known in more kind of academic circles. As far as concussions in sports, it's been kind of mentioned here and there, but it has been something that's been developing. So, I think there's a lot of factors, but, those are probably the most relevant ones.
Yeah, and who wants to share a nasty neck harness? Like I said, and that's even not been changed. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But, the technology as far as that hasn't changed until you guys came along, whether they were leather, whether webbing. It's been the basic standard stuff. You throw a chain or some webbing around there. So what were the events that led to the creation of the Iron Neck? How did this all come about? What was the process involved with that?
Yeah, so Mike Jolly, he invented the Iron Neck in 2012 after seeing new research into the association between neck strength and concussion risk. And Mike played football and wrestled in the early 80s at UCLA. So big guy as a lineman. He was taking shots to the head on nearly every play, and he felt he greatly benefited from the neck strength he developed from wrestling. So, after seeing the post-career impact of CTE on some of his fellow teammates who went on to have long careers in the NFL, that and the growing concern across youth and high school football, he really just dug into the research to see what was out there. And, what he found pointed to the neck as something that athletes could proactively focus on, not to eliminate the risk of concussion or injury, but at least mitigate it. And, this was something that, really, you kind of alluded to it, but, we didn't invent neck training. The neck training, neck strengthening has been around for a long time, but, this was the result of kind of Mike's experience, seeing this research, and then, really just some of that garage gym MacGyver ingenuity and innovation, messing around with different types of, Pilates bands and trying to get different rotational movements. And, it went through this process of developing this initial 15-pound behemoth of a iron neck. It was originally called Halo for the first year. And, that was kind of the origin, getting it to college and football teams. And then we rebuilt a team around it in 2016 and redesigned the product. That's when I got involved with a couple of my friends from business school at University of Texas shortly afterwards. And, we were getting a lot of feedback from different customers that were using it, and really just looked to make this a little bit more mainstream. So, we got the weight of the product down from 15 pounds to 6 pounds to now it's right at about 3 pounds. And, the idea has been, all right, if this works for football, this works for all sports from a concussion standpoint and neck injury standpoint. But, the broader trends out there are injuries and just neck pain that people have from poor posture. So, it's kind of been an evolution of how, who the product has really worked for and been comfortable enough for. And, a couple of those bigger trends around concussions and neck pain. So, we've been evolving. We're constantly engaging with customers to, understand how they're using it. And, that's kind of how we've gotten to the point that we're at now.
Yeah, and I want to kind of get into this because we said neck training really has not evolved in a long time. In fact, we talk about it not being on people's radar. Most, I would say, amateur football programs, it's an afterthought other than doing things like back in the day, neck rolls, where you get in the wrestler's bridge and push your helmet back. Other than that, I think a lot of guys don't even do any neck training. You try and do some mobility exercises. But what makes the iron neck so different from a standard neck harness? I mean, so if there are guys doing neck training, at the most they're probably doing things with a neck harness or maybe hooking a cable, around their head as far as just kind of doing some they can't really do rotations. They can do forward and backward and some side movements. But what makes the iron neck so different from standard neck harnesses?
Yeah, so there's a few things. First, there's a fundamental difference between what iron neck is doing and what something like a four-way neck machine is doing, or what's most common is manual resistance, where in those settings, you're pressing your head against something and trying to move it, move against that resistance. Iron neck works more similar to the way, bands would work in a physical therapy setting, where you're basically pulling at the head from the other side. And so it's forcing the neck and spine, the entire kinetic chain to activate and stabilize. So why that's more relevant in sports where you have, whiplash and concussion is that those types of movements, you're trying to decelerate your head more efficiently rather than move something. So that's one fundamental difference comparing a couple modalities. But the main difference between the actual functionality is, in those traditional modalities, you're operating more on a linear plane. So you're pushing front, back, left, right. And, the muscles in the neck are very much diagonal fibers. And so you actually get more of a contraction when you're rotating your head. So the difference between just the linear aspect and the rotational movement, and then because iron neck is connected to this outer track, you're able to move 360 degrees. So as you turn, those muscles on the opposite side of the resistance are contracting. And you can send those all the way around the neck, depending on what direction you're facing. So those and the rotational movements. And then, I alluded it kind of in the first aspect, but, some of these more traditional modalities are done either sitting down or on your knees or laying down. Iron neck is done standing up. And what that's doing is it's engaging every muscle within that kinetic chain from the point that it's connected to, which here is the very top, all the way down. So it's there's a lot more that you can do from engaging all the muscles throughout that chain compared to a lot of those more old school methods.
When we already sit down enough, the last thing we'd be doing is sitting down, turning our glutes off and everything else where you're doing neck training. One of the things I thought was so amazing about this is just watching videos and things. The whole idea of being able to do figure eights and some of these movements that most people would say that's where they're the stiffest at. Most people would say I get neck pain when I do rotate it, not necessarily when I just lift my head. And there's been no way before now to really train that effectively. And so one of the things we're dealing with here when we talk about rotations is we live in a culture that I would say poor posture is epidemic. I mean, we see it all the time. People are hunched over on their phones all the time, playing games. They have text neck, turkey neck, however you want to call it, but this hunched forward position. How does the iron neck help to combat the effects of poor posture? I mean, we see it so much. How is this not only prehab for that, but how does this actually try and reverse some of the effects of that?
Sure. So I think it's always important to mention that, the first thing is awareness. Awareness is always going to be your number one defense here, and understanding what good posture means when you're sitting or standing. And being able to, catch yourself when you're slipping. And, just even right now in this podcast, I kind of find myself naturally, leaning a little bit forward and, find myself sitting up more upright and pull my shoulder blades back. So, it's in regular life, it's on the football field, same as having your eyes up and being aware of your surroundings, that's going to be your first defense against a brutal hit. The ones that you don't see coming are the ones that ultimately are doing the most damage. So, awareness is always that first thing. And just, if you're even aware that, hey, if I'm, spending a couple hours in a car and, poor posture and, sitting at a desk for 8 hours and kind of all throughout that, looking down at your phone, if you're doing these things in a more appropriate way for your spine angle, that's the first thing you can do. But, the broader problem is you have this imbalance between, poor posture and strain, and then little to no neck strengthening. And so, there's not even this zero sum game situation where, hey, I'm on Instagram and TikTok for, 8 hours a day, but, I'm doing neck strengthening. Not that that's necessarily should be anyone's goal, but you just have this gap where people are constantly putting strain on themselves. There's been plenty of graphics that go around that show you the amount of weight that your head is actually putting onto your spine. And when you're actually leaning forward all the way down the position you find yourself, looking down at your phone, you're basically multiplying the weight of your head by 5. And, your 10 to 12 pound head is now almost 60 pounds of force. And so, it's a very simple analogy, but, if you were to take a 5 pound barbell and hold it out to your side, like, you're not going to have a problem with that for some time, but eventually, the muscles are going to strain and they're going to fatigue. And that's essentially what people are doing to the extreme without doing anything beneficial for the neck.
And what's great about your system is it also incorporates the shoulder mobility also. And can you kind of explain how the two go hand in hand because of how the neck works and where it's attached and all the things that you're explaining? And the really unique thing from the videos that I saw is you actually can train the shoulders at the same time with the neck. And so can you kind of explain how you incorporate this into a total system?
Absolutely. So, the general onboarding for iron neck, we put people through the 6 foundational movements. And this just gets your head and neck in every position. It introduces neck rotation, hip rotation, gets on some more different planes of movement. And so, we kind of have this position that, hey, if you just do this forever and only this, it's going to work. The device is going to help your neck muscles. But, for those people that are, interested to keep developing with it, the next extension is kind of reverse. It's basically just wearing iron neck while you're doing other exercises. And so there's a whole, basically anything you're doing with a kettlebell, a medicine ball, whether it's throws or just holds, if you're doing these with iron neck on, you're kind of hitting, more than, you're hitting 2 or 3 birds with one stone, so to say. And so one area that, we focused a lot on is what you can do with resistance bands. And so, any of these traditional shoulder and upper back exercises that you can do with resistance bands, if you're pairing it with iron neck, you're now adding that stabilization component. And so, we've heard a lot of different feedback on, what does this mean to you? What is this helping with? And, a lot of people say, hey, it kind of makes me check that I'm in the right posture and position when I'm doing this exercise. So that's one aspect, but there's a lot of interconnectedness between the muscles in the neck and the shoulder blade. And one of those muscles is the levator scapulae. And that muscle is one of the most, beaten up muscles from tech neck and text neck and forward head posture. And so you have, this is a big factor where the strain that this muscle is taking from these aspects is having a negative impact on other parts of the body, in this case, the shoulder. And so being able to combine even just something as simple as a band pull apart while you're on a pure isometric hold facing the resistance, that's one extension. And then being able to work in rotation while you're doing these band pull aparts is kind of that second step beyond that. And then actually being able to work diagonal movements where you can find these muscles. And if you have an understanding of the angle that they actually wrap around the neck, you can put yourself into a position and manipulate where that force is impacting the muscles and actually find that very specific plane. And the idea here is that you're actually able to get a more direct contraction on these muscles because you're working them on those planes. And so, back to the original question of, how does this impact the shoulder, is if you have a very tight levator scap, it's going to impact the ability or the mobility, the downward mobility of the scapula, which is going to impact your ability to basically achieve more overhand range of motion. And so while there's a rehab component to working with the levator scap, there's also a performance aspect. I mean, any overhand throw, football, baseball, volleyball, swimming, if you have this impact, which if you're looking at high school and college athletes in particular who are spending more and more time on, existing and growing platforms, like TikTok, these are things that are just going to exist within, people of all ages, but particularly these younger ones. And so how that translates, how these kind of lifestyle, poor posture decisions or indecisions, if you will, affect the neck are ultimately going to have an impact on performance in various sports.
Yeah, and I love you talk about this issue with these muscles affecting performance, because the standard protocol right now is to just do some kind of release. I mean, we all have seen the peanut, all these different types of mobility balls, and all those tools are good, but they are really going to only help deal with the symptoms of the problem. And until you do more than just release those muscles and actually train them to function correctly, that's what I love about this device, is because I said for too long we think, well, I'll just roll that out. And what happens is guys roll that out with a peanut or mobility ball, but then that mobility eventually leaves. The body tightens back down. And from what I hear you're saying is that we actually can start to correct the problem, not just treat the symptom.
Yeah, and I think, what we really like to see on social media is when, we have customers that are posting pictures where we are one of the tools in their tool set. They've got iron neck next to a right next to, any type of massage gun, and just knowing that, hey, this isn't a silver bullet. Iron Neck's not going to, solve all your life's problems. We think that we can fix some of them, or at least, if you're having significant pain, hey, maybe we can bring that down from, 80% to 30% and, make life a little more manageable for people. But, I think, people that have an understanding of the different things that you can do in the whole process, we just want to fill one piece of that. And so it's good to see that some people, accept that. And we have customers that are, I guess, prospective customers that reach out and, say, hey, I do 4-way neck machine all the time. How is this going to help? And so, the person that's saying, hey, this isn't going to completely replace what I'm doing. Because, first, if you're already using a 4-way neck machine, you're obviously serious about neck strength. And so you'd be open to, what are the other aspects and what are the shortcomings of a 4-way neck machine? Iron Neck is not going to, directly compete with, pure flexion and extension and lateral flexion exercises like these traditional modalities perform. But, most of these other ones aren't able to do the rotational types of movements. And then, really the way that we optimally like to think about it is that, when Iron Neck is on your head, it's almost like it's not even there. You're completely free to move as long as you know how to move with it. And that's what the 6 foundational movements kind of train you up on doing.
Yeah, I love my percussion massage gun. I love all that stuff. But I said those are modalities to get you to be able to work out, but we're not correcting the problem. I love my So Right, all those things. But this is one of the things I talk about with people with neck training. You want to not just treat symptoms, you want to get better, which leads me into why do you think so many people have chronic neck pain? And how does the Iron Neck work to alleviate pain? Because that's one of the big things that we're hearing about this device is people who've had chronic pain find that it goes away after a time of using this device.
Sure. Yeah. So, there's a pretty wide array of problems and issues that people have with the neck. But, the people that are kind of tuned into neck training that are not part of the kind of strength world are unfortunately the people who have already had the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a treatment and not a proactive solution. And that's for any type of neck injury or neck pain, just as it is, with the whole concept of managing concussion risk from end to end. And, this is not a linear path. This is very much a cycle that, hey, why would you even go to the gym and work out? Well, it's to be healthy. So you can at least reduce the risk of getting any type of, general health diseases. And so, when it comes to the neck, a lot of people have a lot of tightness and stiffness. And so, being able to just activate the muscles, not just in the neck, but through the entire spine. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but it helps when I mentioned kind of helping people find the right posture. What Iron Neck does very effectively is it helps identify weaknesses. And if you're just keeping everything locked, standing straight, looking forward, and just rotating across 360 degrees with this force staying on the same angle, if you do that slowly, you will feel some part in your lower back kind of, not seize up, but you'll kind of feel a very soft twitch and it's activating there. And you realize, hey, this is a weak spot. And so being able to train the whole neck and core, spine all the way down, gives you the ability to identify some of those things. But I think at the root of it is just everyone has kind of come down here. And, what you'll hear from, PTs or chiropractors is that, as you come down lower, your eyes always find the horizon. And so they're always going to come up here. And that's why over time, you see people down here, but they're still looking up and their spine is completely jacked up at this point. And you just start to see all these other issues that stem from that. So simply by being able to just improve your posture, there's a lot of issues that are going to be resolved with that. And, pain is kind of the last point. And so some of these things, resolve that pain. Yeah,
I like the body weight, the chicken exercise. You're putting your your chin forward and backward, that you can actually do that with resistance with the iron neck. That's what I think is so amazing about this device. And then you're talking about, doing kettlebell exercises, swings. That's going to be killer to develop the unit as far as the entire body working as one unit. So we'll talk more about that. But how does the iron neck help to prevent concussions? In any sport right now, that is the hot topic. When I work with coaches, when I work with athletes, it can decimate a team. It can decimate a season because of concussions, something very serious, especially things like ice hockey. We see this with guys, their career's going great, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in concussion protocol. And how can this prevent that? Because, again, we're talking about this could change people's livelihoods, literally, by doing that. How does this prevent concussions? How is it good prehab?
Yeah, so there's kind of two aspects to this. The first is, how can you reduce whiplash forces? And the second is, how can you mitigate rotational forces or rotational acceleration on the head? And so, the first aspect to it is, first, this is something that athletes can control. There's a lot of things in the sport that you can't control. So there's other aspects that try to improve those. So you have, rules that are and changes to the game that are trying to at least reduce the exposure of certain types of plays. But neck strength is always something that's there. Even when your equipment is off, you're walking to your car, you could slip and fall. These are muscles that that need to be prepared to reduce these types of whiplash forces. I think something that's very important to understand is that concussions aren't just coming from when there's a head impact.
Yes, absolutely.
It's. I think that's there's obviously a lot of marketing dollars behind helmets that are out there, and that's why you see so much focus on that because people kind of get this false sense of security. And while there are evolving technologies to incorporate more force absorption, being able to reduce rotational forces in helmets, at the end of the day, your built-in armor is already there. It's your muscles in your body, and like I mentioned earlier, the awareness that you have around. So there's obviously ways to know how to play, but the neck is it's one piece in this kinetic chain, and it's the piece that's connecting your brain to the rest of your body. And so if you have an impact to the body, that force is translating up through the spine, and it's ultimately going to get to the head. And you'll see this with tackles to the body. You'll see this a lot when athletes are going to the ground and falling backwards. And part of the reason for that is that the muscles in the front are the weakest muscles in the neck, and so those are muscles that might not be getting exercise as much. So just being able to have a stronger, there's research that shows the stiffness of the neck is an important factor. How quickly the muscles can stiffen, which is why awareness is so important to it. So that's the first piece. And then when it comes to rotational forces, there's still a lot of growing research into this field and understanding the actual impact in the head, in the brain. But what doctors have said is that it's actually these rotational accelerative forces that are causing tearing and shearing of the axons in the brain that are causing the most significant damage and some of the early precursors to CTE. And so that was kind of this original hypothesis in Mike's early research was, he saw this one study that showed 7,000 high school male and female athletes across a few different sports and measured their neck strength throughout and looked at concussion rates. And it showed that for every 1 pound increase in neck strength, the odds of concussion decreased by 5%. So, as I said, there's no silver bullet. This isn't something that's eliminating the risk, but it's very clear. And when you have this cohort, those that have the stronger, bigger necks had a lower rate of concussion than those that had the smaller, weaker necks, which sounds pretty logical, but, it really wasn't until, this study was published in 2014 that, this actually kind of became more well-known, at least in the sports high school and college and pro athletes ring. So being able to the second aspect of that was then seeing some of this very early research around the rotational forces and rotational acceleration on the brain. And so that kind of those connections of, hey, can I strengthen the neck through these rotational movements? Can that help improve the neck's ability to activate faster? Can it help with reducing some of these rotational forces? And so when you look at the original Iron Neck had nothing except for pure isometrics and kind of free movement. And the first iteration in there was actually putting a little thumb screw to add some friction to the plate so that you actually now added some rotational resistance that is the equivalent of this while you rotate. So those are the two key aspects. And when it comes to athletes actually being proactive and trying to reduce their risk of concussion with neck strengthening.
Yeah, because all athletes need to take this seriously, because I think you already hit on it, is that so many people think, well, it's the headshot that always causes the concussion. I was watching a study, it was a video series, and they were talking about the body shot, especially like a check in hockey, the recoil. When you get hit in the body, the way that the head bounces, it is not just, headshots. People need to understand that anytime you're going to take a shot to the body, your head's going to be affected. And so this is just, pure great prehab for any athlete that's going to come into contact whatsoever. Maybe you're not taking shots to the head, but your brain can still be affected by body shots. And so this is great stuff. How does neck training then help with mobility and flexibility? We know that mobility is just such a huge issue today. How does training the neck affect everything else as far as flexibility goes?
Yeah, so that kind of gets to one of those fundamental differences with Iron Neck, that you're able to move the neck in every possible position. And so that's going to be there's going to be a different approach depending on what your goals are. If you have a more serious neck injury, you're going to start with very, very light resistance in the band, and it comes standard with a band that stretches from 0 to 25 pounds out as you stretch it from 3 to 9 feet out. But we have 5 different bands that go from, a 5 and 10 pound max to 35 and 50 pound max. They can be, combined in different senses. So, depending on your goals, you can really vary the amount of resistance that you're actually training against. So that's the first aspect. And then, what Iron Neck is essentially doing is you're engaging all the muscles throughout the kinetic chain through isometrics, and you're utilizing them throughout various movements. So that's why it's important that as you're going through, you're not going right out to 25 pounds and, right out of the gate and saying, all right, what can I do? If you're a stronger person, you can do that obviously, and starting with just this isometric hold, and moving into a 360 spin, and then, a look left, look right movement. But it's about kind of finding where that initial level is. And that's going to be very different for, an NFL lineman as it is for, grandma and, who's rehabbing, neck injury. And so just the ability to work through not just those isometrics across the 360 range, but do that with neck rotation that's isolated. The lock neck body turn is where you kind of put your hands in front as just more of a cue to watch, and you're keeping your neck locked with your upper body and just rotating at your hips. And now you're sending that rotation or that force around the neck in a kind of a more stiff position, but you're still varying it through the muscles. So each of these muscles is it's increasing in activation and then decreasing activation. And it's all dependent on the angle that you're facing. So mobility and flexibility kind of go hand in hand with how you're naturally using Iron Neck. Whereas again, a lot of the traditional modalities is just about kind of doing these max reps, and it's very, very locked in on one type of movement.
Yeah, so basically you're loading mobility, so taking mobility to another level with these isometrics. It's fantastic stuff. And so I want to talk, kind of dive deep here. How does neck training affect the rest of the body? One of the things that I have been convinced of, and I don't have any pure science, to show this right now. But when you train the neck, when you train the feet, it has an effect on the central nervous system in the fact that your body, when you're getting under a heavy load, let's say you're going to do a heavy squat, your body's going to tell you, your brain's going to assess and see whether the central nervous system can handle that load or not. And I find that when I do more neck training, my CNS gets more amped. I'm able to handle heavier loads, even though that load is on my back or it's a deadlift where it's not neck specific. Can you tell us how the neck affects the CNS?
Yeah. So, kind of as we've been talking about, everything's connected. And so, whether it's, neck, back, shoulder, different areas that you're looking to treat, you're depending on, again, where you're facing and the movement you're making, you're able to control the level of activation throughout that. When it comes to the CNS, some of the areas that we've actually seen people reach out and share some of their feedback has been around, how it's improved their ability to bench press. They'll do this right before, and that's actually one area where it kind of taps into, you're actually activating the levator scapulae, which is not something that people really ever think much about. And so, being able to activate different areas like that can have that positive impact on different lifts, different movements that you're making in the gym. And so that's why ultimately, as you progress with iron neck, if you're going beyond those 6 foundational movements, you're starting to experiment with some of these compound movements and seeing how ultimately, how does this feel? That's kind of the main question that you want to be asking yourself as you're going through these exercises is, where am I feeling it? How is that different from, what I'm normally feeling through an exercise? And, depending on what your goals are, how can this specific movement have a positive impact on my end goal? And so, a lot of, when you start to get into some of this sport specific training, a lot of it comes down to kind of this reverse engineering approach of, what is the risk that an individual person has? Where are they most vulnerable? And that's why, you'll see, especially, some of the college programs and professional football teams where your wide receivers are going to have a slightly modified program compared to your linemen. Very different types of concussion risk. One is more subconcussive focused with linemen. They're in very different positions. And so if you can actually put yourself in these positions and you can imagine, hey, a wide receiver facing away from the resistance and looking over their shoulder, performing these diagonals, you're actually putting yourself in these positions where you're most likely going to take that dangerous hit. And then, for linemen, you can actually, attach the anchor point a little bit higher. We actually first were seeing this with rugby players where they were kind of getting into a scrum position. And so, linemen, you get into a 3-point stance and you can actually, get up, move left, right, those same types of positions. So that ultimately is, when you get very specific into, a certain type of sport or movement, how can you actually train, the muscles and the kinetic chain throughout the body and really get the CNS more tuned into the types of, movements that the body's going to need to make, when you actually take one of these impacts.
Yeah, and I'm hoping this next thing really intrigues me, and I'm hoping maybe that you guys can do some studies on this. I mean, just from what I've seen, I think that this probably has a huge benefit to the vestibular system. We all know that, this whole inner ear effect, when we want to train the vestibular system, a lot of times we'll do walking while we're doing rotations, different head motions, that the eyes and the rotation of the neck, the focus when you're rotating the neck actually can train that vestibular system and helps with proprioception. I think what's really cool about this, and I don't know if you guys had any feedback on this, by loading those modalities, by doing these different head movements and different focuses with the eyes, have you found anybody that's reported an increase in imbalance and proprioception?
Yeah, so that's actually a very exciting, kind of area that's out there now. And it's something that we started seeing a little bit more, not just on the concussion and sports side, but also on the rehab side with PTs for non-athletes. And when we see something where you're seeing it on like the strength and conditioning, sports side, and the rehab side, that's when we know, hey, there's actually something that's really here. And so we've seen some really interesting applications where PTs are using, basically a laser that they have kind of like a headband and a laser on the front. And, there's different exercises that people can do where you have different symbols that'll indicate, if you're looking left or looking right or doing a protraction, retraction, and they actually have this with the iron neck on. And there's other drills of actually, with this on, with iron neck on, tracing through a maze that you'd have on a wall with that laser. And so it's very helpful because it gives people a visual cue to follow. And with iron neck, you're putting, in these scenarios, very, very light load, very light tension on those neck muscles. And, we've seen a lot of success with that on the rehab side with PTs and utilizing that. But there's growing research around, the kind of post-concussion and the impact of vestibular. Bridget Wallace is a person out in Austin, Texas as well, who runs basically a concussion and vestibular clinic. And, she's one of the leading experts on this type of stuff. And, that's a very important piece of this concussion management, process and really more of a mindset that people need to take is that, when it comes to concussions, you're as weak as your weakest link. And some of that is going to be the proactive stuff. Neck training is one area that is part of that. But, even if you're doing everything that you're supposed to do, concussions are still going to happen with people running around and, chasing a ball. And it's just part of sports. And so, the goal of the strength and conditioning coach is always to mitigate the risk of that injury. And so, the post-concussion protocols and return to play, return to learn, these are things that, initially people were just locking people in a room that was super dark. And, we've learned, hey, there needs to be some activation, some mental stimulation throughout this, where you're not just locking someone in. So at every stage of this process, there's been more research that's come out just because over the last, almost 10 years, there's just been a lot more focus on it. And this stuff has grown and grown. You get more funding in different, into different research. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, this is all helping kind of build a safer way to compete. And, ultimately how you're treating people, where the majority of these people are going to, go professional in something other than their sport. Yep. Post-college. So, there's a lot of stories out there of people who, are just, their mind is kind of decimated and, super sensitive to light, sound. These are things that impact people's lives, post-sport. And so vestibular rehab is kind of one piece of that, that there's been a lot of exciting developments around.
Yeah, I'm fired up about that. I do vestibular training every day in some form, but when you can load those movements, I think you guys are on to something really unique here. I think you're going to hear reports of guys, and they probably don't even realize this, but their balance is changing. The way that they run is changing. All these things are happening because this thing, the neck, what's involved, trains so many different parts of the body. We're talking about the vestibular system. They're developing proprioception stuff. I mean, and that's why I say this device, from everything that I've seen, looks like it's for everybody. Why should a mom at home or, I think a lot of ladies, when they look at this device, it's kind of scary to them. How do you help people understand that neck training is for everybody? It's not just for the football player. It's not just for the wrestler or the hockey player. It's for everybody. How do you get that message across, and how do you get them to overcome the fear of the device?
Yeah, so I think it's obviously kind of the big marketing challenge. There's an aspect of just transparency. Like, look, you're going to look silly with this on your head. It looks a little bit like a medieval torture device. But if we're showing people the success that all different types of people have, and in this case, we're showing the moms, that are having neck pain. We're showing the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who is, wants to keep competing, but, keeps having these injuries. Every different type of person that's using Iron Neck is, there's success stories that are out there. And so, for us, it's about pulling those stories out and then showing them. But fortunately, when it comes to, Facebook ads that we do a lot of, it's while there might be some shortcomings on kind of the algorithms and how it impacts you, ultimately it's going to be showing more of those same types of people that are engaging with that content. So if we're putting something out, that's showing, how this is helping with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners and top level athletes, you're not going to get a ton of moms that are clicking in and watching, 95% of the video there. But if we are showing the video of the mom that's talking about, the exact issue that they're having, how they're doing Iron Neck, they're doing it at home. They're not doing it. You don't have to do it out at some gym. So, even if there is this aspect of, I'm going to look silly, in-home fitness is obviously growing now, as not just, gyms are going to be reopening, but also, businesses are evolving and people are, there's going to be a lot more people that are working from home. And, how do you actually, kind of have an efficient in-home fitness training system? There's obviously a lot of options out there, but one thing that's not being replaced is people's addiction to, looking down at their phone. And, in some people's cases, they might be doing actually more of that now that they're at home, versus, kind of breaks at work. So, I think just to kind of come back to the question, it's just about, being transparent about the success that people are having with it, the problems that it's actually solving. And you know what, like, it looks a little silly, but, we strongly believe, and our customers also validate that the trade-off is very much in your favor, beyond looking silly for a few minutes a week.
Oh, absolutely. And this question, I think is interesting if you've had any feedback about it, but do you find anybody is sleeping better as a result of this device? I know for guys like me that have been strongmen for years, neck pain during sleep, shoulder pain. Have you had any reports of people actually getting a better night's sleep as a result of this?
We have. I wouldn't say it's something that, we would be able to make any type of claim over, but we've had, a handful of customers that have mentioned sleep. There is one aspect that I think is important to kind of clarify, because we see it often in some comments on our ads of how using this device and strengthening your neck is going to give you sleep apnea. And that is just not what the research indicates.
Absolutely.
The research shows that there is a correlation between larger neck size and sleep apnea. And, the difference there is that you probably have a lot more people that are overweight that have more fat in the neck.
Absolutely.
And that is contributing to it. And that increasing neck muscle is not going to be the thing that is giving you sleep apnea. So, we do our best to at least point people to the research that's out there. For some people, unfortunately, seeing, research that's, not been, peer reviewed in every single journal that's out there is not really valid. But, there is research that's out there that is in peer reviewed journals that, speaks to the association between neck size and sleep apnea.
Well, to me, it just makes sense that training the neck would give you a better night's sleep. But, these kind of studies, they're apples to oranges. Like you said, you could have somebody as a major neck, but they've never trained it. That's for sure. This has been fantastic today. I understand that you are friends with Fairfax Hackley. You got any good Fairfax stories, but as we're getting ready to wind down? I've
got a few with Fairfax. Fairfax is he's kind of this anomaly. He's this person that everyone in the industry knows, but at the same time, not really everyone knows about Fairfax. It's been it's been great, kind of getting to know him over the past few years. But he invited us out to the Arnold Sports Festival. I think the first year was back in I think it was 2016. So we were there 2016 and 2017. And the Arnold Sports Festival, for people who don't know, is just this completely out of this world event that is most known for having strongman events, bodybuilding competitions. But I mean, it's basically like this mini Olympics. I think there's got to be over 100 events that they, like, different sports and different types of events that they have. And probably one of the most entertaining one. I don't know. Have you been to the Arnold any time?
Oh yeah, many times. I've actually got to present there.
I don't know if you've ever gone into any of the fencing competitions.
I've watched them.
Yeah, so I had never watched any fencing. I'll get to a Fairfax story in a second, but the fencing there, I'd never watched fencing before. Maybe I'd seen a little bit on TV, but in the Olympics. But what happens, especially in these younger age divisions, is whenever a point is scored, like it could be the first point of the game, there's this completely over-the-top celebration to all the people that are there, which might be like 12 parents, but especially it's supposed to be like kind of in the face of the person that you just got. And they do it every single point. So just going in there and seeing these like 8 and 10-year-olds just completely go berserk is kind of one of those experiences. I think anyone who goes to the Arnold in future years should try and pop their head in at least for a match there. But back to Fairfax, Fairfax has this kind of, Godfather type table at the main bar restaurant, kind of right at the juncture where in the hotels where everyone's walking through. And, he's always got, his good friends there. You always have, kind of celebrity guys coming through. But, Randy Couture is a good friend of Fairfax's. And, he was there that first year. And, we brought an iron neck in. We kind of just always had it on the hip. And, at this point it was still a pretty, big, heavy thing. But, Fairfax was able to, get Randy a couple of drinks and, hand him the iron neck. And he popped it on and just did this full demo, like right in the middle of this bar. And I mean, it's kind of like this, we've always called it, what the fuck is that marketing? Mm-hmm. And that was probably one of these peak moments where, Randy was just kind of going through this crazy neck exercise. No one knew at all what was going on. But after that, I mean, just kind of hanging out and every once in a while you get another, kind of big name or competitor come by, and, Fairfax knows everyone knows Fairfax. So, and he's constantly delivering the one-liner joke. So I don't think any of those would be appropriate for the airwaves, but they're always good.
Well, I'm glad that he put us in touch with you because Fairfax is awesome, and I have enjoyed having you so much today. So I want to thank our guest today, Robert Sherman, for investing in all of our listeners. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
I want to thank our sponsors, ZionMissionaryChurch.net, NeuroPowerSource.com, podcast producer, Drew Kiespert, film director, Jolynn Thomas, head of talent relations, Mr. Fairfax Hackley. Be sure to rate us and subscribe to the Pressing the Limits podcast. For more ways to watch and listen to this podcast, check out the Pressing the Limits podcast website.